Hello everybody, my name is Boulevard, and welcome to another Tournament Tactician where I will be going over the World's Patch Tournament tier list. Before I get into that, I did want to go over the qualifying decks from the top 16 so that you know what everybody is playing. And just in case you haven't seen this, maybe you don't have a Twitter presence, maybe my YouTube videos are the only LOR content you consume. You should probably branch out a little bit. But I will be going over these deck lists as well as how they impact the tier list, things like that. There's not a lot going on this weekend. There is the online league series, which of course open to the Americas, RIP Crossshard. We'll get into that a little bit later. Link will be in the description. Unfortunately, as I had mentioned on the broadcast and on Twitter, I was not selected to cast the World Championship for Legends of Runeterra. I thought I was crushing it. Riot said, yeah, you're crushing it, but not this time. So we'll worry about next time. So, getting into this, obviously, the one thing that you're going to notice is Sivir Demacia still showed up in spades. Sivir Demacia, Draven Caitlyn, Zoe Nami was very much like the lineup for Europe and the Americas. Things were a little bit more wild on the Southeast Asia side, mostly because there was almost no Sivir Demacia played in that tournament. I think there was less Sivir Demacia than Thralls, if I remember correctly. Like, it was not popular, and of course, Yamato coming through with some spicy one-ofs, like the only Darkness player in there. I think, yeah, How To Die also coming through, the only Shen Jarvan, the only Twisted Fate, Gangplank, and Pin Ping Ho, the only Thrall. So, like, every one of that we got was from the Southeast Asia region, which is kind of expected, right? The Western meta is a little bit more unified, and it seems the Eastern meta was also unified because neither Southeast Asia or Asia brought a large presence of Sivir Demacia, so it will be interesting to see how these things clash out. Now, there wasn't a lot of Zoe Nami in the Southeast Asia portion either. It was a lot of Bandletree, a lot of Caitlyn, Draven, and things of that nature. And then just the third deck was always sort of debatable, right? We got Plunder over here, we got Thralls over here, we got Darkness, we got Shen Jarvan, we got Plunder again. And then there's like the Zoe Nami and the Draven Ezreal scattered throughout the Bandletree. But we really had differing metas because, like, you'll notice in Europe, pretty much everybody played some kind of Draven Caitlyn or Draven PNZ at the very least. And there wasn't a lot of Scion either, really only 3. I think it was 1 per each region, if I thought of that right. Yes, I did. Which, you know, I talked about this deck and I said that it was probably going to underperform. I thought it was going to be very popular and not do extremely well, and it turns out it just wasn't really either. It wasn't very popular at all. Zoe Nami really took over. Draven Caitlyn was something the players really leaned into, and there is a difference between Draven Caitlyn and Draven Ezreal, which I'll get into a little bit more when I get on the tier list, but I do think that Sivir Demacia is something the Eastern players are going to have to adapt to, as it does have a good matchup into Zoe Nami, and with the addition of the Absolver across the board, it's doing pretty well into Bandletree as well. You get that leveled Sivir, you give your entire board overwhelm, and things just kind of go from there. Even the Noxus versions aren't going to handle that particularly well because they don't have great ways to pop the spell shield and damage you and then finish you off with a Ravenous Flock. But Bandletree did perform about as well as you would expect it to. A little bit skewed on the numbers thanks to Real Kree qualifying with 3 Bandletree decks. Not sure how he did it. You can go check out the qualifier, though. I think we caught a couple of his matches. I think we got his match versus Zelu in the winner's bracket, all that kind of stuff. So definitely check out the footage on JDozaGG. His Twitch channel should still have all the VODs. They're a little pieced out because his internet kept dropping, but that was what it was. Anyway, let's get into the tier list. So let's actually talk about the tier list. Now, this one's not going to be super in-depth. I will save that for next week. I'm going to try to pump out as much like Worlds content as I can for you guys. On Wednesday, when I put out this Tournament Tactician, I don't know if I'm going to have access to the deck list that the players have brought, or if the groups are even going to be drawn yet at that point. But I did take off work for the entirety of the World Championship, as well as the day before, because initially it was Wednesday to Saturday, in anticipation for casting the event. Not too mad about having the days off anyway. Didn't feel like I needed to go back to work, because now I can relax, make content for you guys, and enjoy the World Championship as a spectator. So things are not going to be super in-depth right now. Be more in-depth next week. Hopefully I can get like prediction videos and breakdowns of lineups, but I don't know how far in advance I'm going to have this information. So for now, we go a little bit simpler on the rundown. Call back to some things last week, explain where I got things wrong, explain where I got things right, and keep in mind that the online league series is happening this weekend if you want to play in something, and a link for that will be in the description below. Also, I'm casting Fight Night this week, so that's cool. Be sure to tune into that. I'll be casting with Casanova for the first time. Very excited for that. So, tier list. Darkness Control is tier 1. It didn't perform super well in the qualifier. Yamato was the only player to carry it through, and I actually have a whole spiel about Japanese card players, and that's why it's not surprising to me that Yamato was the one to get in with Darkness Control, but that's for another time. The point is, this deck was on the cusp in a couple of regions, like EU players felt just shy with it, the Americas players felt just shy with it. I think part of that is not understanding the meta that they were going into and building improperly, so if this deck can get a little bit more refined, knowing that we are in a Draven, Caitlyn, Sivir, and Nami Elusive's meta, then I think Darkness can actually start to perform to the level that I expect it to. Nami Elusives, this one goes without saying, knew this deck was going to be really good. It floundered a bit on camera. Yeah, the players are really struggling when they're not finding the Namis and the Shellys, which is one of the reasons that I mentioned last week that I'm not the biggest fan of this deck, but it is what it is. The power level is certainly there. Sivir was something that I got wrong. I said that I was just going to ignore this deck entirely because we got the information that it was going to be nerfed on like Tuesday. I had to get this video out on like Wednesday, which leaves me literally zero time because the patch doesn't actually hit until like Wednesday afternoon in order to test Sivir Demacia in a meaningful capacity, and a lot of the players ended up cutting Ruin Runner, and that has been moved out for like the Absolver and Valkyrian Bruiser so that they can get some lucky finds. And just adding the Absolver to the deck really helps push through that Bandletree matchup. Being able to go wide with the Sivers and all your other units having Overwhelm works for it. And then of course had a great Nami Zoe matchup. I think it won every time we saw it on camera because Majin's did cut out in the middle of his qualifier round. We didn't actually get to see it lose to Nami Elusive, so the mysteries of that one will remain. Bandletree got that one right. This deck's so good, Real Keep brought it 3 times and still qualified. Lulu Demacia, you know, the Lulu Zed, the Lulu Poppy, just rally decks in general. Still popping up in spades. Sivir, one of the better rally decks of the format. Draven Caitlyn was really the only thing in Tier 1 that I got, like, that I didn't include in Tier 1 that should have been in Tier 1. And part of it, I think, is I didn't realize how different the Draven Caitlyn and the Draven Ezreal builds were looking. As you can see, I've actually separated them off of the tier list for how different they are. The main differences are that Draven Ezreal is playing a little bit more like it always has with like this burn finisher, right? You throw Mystic, like you level the Ezreal, you play Captain Farron, you throw down some Decimates, you really try to finish your opponent off with the Ezreal, with the Decimates, things like that. Draven Caitlyn gets to play a much more grindy sort of game, thanks to Lost Souls, the Caitlyn traps setting you up for Ravenous Flocks and Scorched Earths. Like, you're not utilizing as many resources in order to kill your opponent's units, and you are gaining more resources through the Lost Souls. Now, Draven Ezreal, by all means, can play Lost Souls, but you really need to play Captain Farron in Draven Ezreal, because the Ezreal is not hitting the Nexus as often as you said, which is one of the reasons that I had initially put the sort of matchup into, or both of these decks in Tier 2, as I said that Ezreal is having a hard time hitting the Nexus, probably not doing the best in terms of like a burn strategy for just whittling down your opponent. It'll probably do better into Bandletree, but Draven Caitlyn handles that one just as well because you're not really playing this burn game. You're not narrowly winning when you go through and they play the Bandletree and it's at 10 and oh man, you've got 6 life left and luckily I Decimate and Ezreal one. That's not how the games are ending. You're Scorched Earthing the Bandletree and killing everything on the board, and that's something that Draven Caitlyn does better, which is what I had said last week, is that I prefer the Draven Caitlyn. I just didn't realize how different they looked and how much better I thought Draven Caitlyn was going to be. So that's kind of where I got that one wrong. Draven Scion got moved down. It just hasn't really been performing up to snuff. It is losing to the control-based meta that I kind of said we would be in. Now, obviously, Nami Zoe, Draven Caitlyn, Sivir is not the control lineup that I thought we were going to be running into, but Bandletree and Darkness Control were still doing some work. Thralls did a little bit of work as well. We're not seeing like the Anivia that I thought we would perform well, but I think Draven Caitlyn is still something that players are really honing in on. Obviously, it's very similar to Draven Ezreal. You don't have to learn too many new tricks. Bandletree is like almost a control deck. I don't know. Bandletree is weird. It plays so much. The reason I say it's almost a control deck before anybody takes that out of context is archetypes are so hard to nail down in Legends of Runeterra that I've started memeing that like if it plays Ravenous Flock, it's a control deck, and Bandletree plays Ravenous Flock, so it's kind of a control deck. Anyway, I digress. Draven Scion just did not perform up to snuff. I don't know if it's too predictable, if the players brought the wrong builds, because there are a lot of different tech choices you can bring in Draven Scion. I don't know if everybody just didn't bring enough survival skills, because the ladder has been a pretty hostile environment for that card. I was a big fan of 3 survival skills, but everybody's saying like, yeah, you know, 3's great for tournament, you run 1 on ladder. I kind of adhered to that as well, but maybe players just stuck too much to their ladder build, or they just didn't perform as well as they thought they would against like Draven Caitlyn. You know, maybe you bring Draven Scion and you're like, yeah, I body Draven Ezreal every time I run into it. It's so easy to discard their Pharons with my Aloof Travelers, and then you play against Draven Caitlyn that's playing triple Lost Soul, and your Aloof Travelers are suddenly detrimental. It's pretty easy to grind out the Draven Scion, and I think players just had enough answers for it, because this was a pretty expected deck, and it was definitely the deck that I think underperformed the most. You know, it only showed up 3 in the top 16. It just didn't have the high play rate that I thought it would. Thralls, I called this out as a dark horse. Pen Ping Ho agreed, topped with it. I'll take that one. Draven Ezreal, a couple players topped with it. I think Draven Caitlyn was more popular. I think Shihu even ran a split of the 3 of them. I think it was 2 Caitlyn and 1 Ezreal. But Draven's really just the king of the meta right now is kind of what I'm getting at. Lee Sin didn't top, but is definitely not out of the question to appear in the top 16, especially given the meta that we were kind of looking at. There's not as much explosive power in the server. There's not as many spell shields, you know? There's no Ruin Runner. It's actually a lot easier for you to take chump blocks and get value off of your Eye of the Dragons. And I think that Lee Sin is something that players are going to be really looking at as like, hey, is this the deck that comes in and upsets the meta? Especially because, like, Zoe Nami doesn't have a Lee Sin answer. They play, like, 1 Hush at best. I don't think they have a burst speed way to, like, pop a spell shield if you get a Bastion down onto the Lee Sin, and generally they're only playing 1 Hush, so Lee Sin I think is something that I'm definitely still keeping an eye on for this weekend. Plunder did perform pretty admirably. I think I had mentioned that this deck looks pretty good on paper into a lot of the meta, and the problem it's going to have is consistency issues. That seemed to be the case. Karm Ezreal, Frostbite midrange, another 2 decks that sort of performed about as much as I expected. Frostbite midrange, as long as Makis is in the tournament, Frostbite midrange has to be at least tier 2, and what a surprise, Makis made it to the cusp of the World Championship qualifier, lost to Realkey in the final round, otherwise would have made it through with Frostbite midrange and Shen Jarvan. And I think Reckoning is still just incredibly positioned into the meta. It absolutely destroys Nami elusives. They probably don't have the removal for the 5 attack unit that you got down. Bandletree gets, oh boy, hosed by Reckoning. So I think that Frostbite midrange is something that players should still be looking out for. I think this is very much a deck that can come in and upset what we saw in the qualifiers. And then honestly, I don't feel a need to go over tier 3. These are just kind of decks that are on the tier list because they're on the tier list. I don't think anybody actually qualified playing Lurk. Jay Doza is really big on Lurk lately. He seems to think that, like, this is the gold star that everybody is missing out on in the meta. I'm thinking that's more something like Thralls or Lee Sin, but I did want to call out that my co-caster had a thought for once, so that was nice. Anyway, that is going to do it for me. As I mentioned, just like a quick rundown of the tier list to let you know some of the things that I got right, some of the things that I got wrong. Not as a control-centric meta as I expected, and most of that is just off of the back that I underestimated Sivir Demacia. I think that the Southeast Asia tournament probably looked more like what I expected things to, and that might mean that I'm behind on the meta, or I'm reading the wrong meta, because I don't know that Southeast Asia is necessarily, like, behind on the meta. It's very possible that they come in and just absolutely stomp us, because we're still playing Sivir Demacia, because we didn't want to think and build new decks. But that's what the World Championship is for, right? Figure out who's right, who's wrong. We'll see who actually makes some swaps, because obviously the players are going to be able to change their decks from the qualifier rounds into the top 16. So be on the look for more content. I have player profiles coming out for every player that qualified from Americas, aside from Majin Bey, because I already wrote one for him. And those will be going out on the Giant Slayer blog over the course of the next few days. You know, they'll all be out before the World Championship. So be on the lookout for those. Follow me on Twitter at casterboulevard. I tweet bangers only. You know, get in on the ground floor. I'm not super famous yet. I missed out on Worlds, so I got another year to wait until you know, the fame and all the notoriety comes in. But I'll get there. So you really want to get in on the ground floor. You want to be one of my first followers. You want to be able to say, you know, I always believed in this Boulevard guy. You're a little late to the party. I think this is like week 68 of Tournament Tacticians, but hey, you know, you got here in the first 2 years. That's more than most people are going to. So thank you so much for watching. My name is Boulevard, and as always, good luck in your tournaments.